Hello and welcome to the Actual Tech Media Expert Series. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event on firewalls, why they matter, and where they fit in the cloud era. So before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have that dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that come in. The Q&A panel is also the place to just say hello, which a lot of you have been doing already. We love to hear where you're logging in from. And it's also the place to let us know if we can help in the unlikely event that you have any technical issues. So a browser refresh will fix most of those problems, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we will provide further technical assistance. Now, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Somebody's going to have a great way to start the weekend there. So, of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom of that handout section and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, these Expert Series events are special product neutral looks at pressing technology problems presented by an expert in the field. But the support of our sponsors is what makes it possible for us to bring you this content. So we want to give a special shout out to those sponsors. And over the next few slides, I'm going to share some messages from our sponsors today, and they'll refer to links that you can find in the handout section of your console at any time during the presentation. As always, the handout section also has a few valuable Actual Tech Media links. There's a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics. And there's a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events like this one. So now, before we get into the main presentation, a few words from our sponsors. We're supported by Palo Alto. So join Palo Alto Networks at the Intersect Network Security Summit, where they'll share AI innovations, best practices for implementing foundational zero trust components, followed by diving into designing a zero trust architecture for hybrid workforce, hybrid cloud, and IoT deployments with hands-on labs. That's coming up next week for the Americas and the week after for Europe. So you can grab that QR code on your screen or use the link in your handout section to get more information. Today's event is also sponsored by Zscaler. So Zscaler Firewall, no appliances, just firewall as a service. You can see Zscaler Firewall in action with the QR code on your screen or the URL in the handouts. Once you're at that product tour site, you can take the Zscaler Firewall for a spin. You'll get an inside look at the cloud-native controls designed to protect your users, applications, and locations without sacrificing performance or worrying about capacity. Get started with Zscaler today. So once again, take advantage of that handout section where you can find all the links that you've just seen. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, Evgeniy Kharam. Evgeniy will tell you a little bit about himself when he gets started here as well, but I'll just say that he's got deep cybersecurity experience from being a cybersecurity engineer with the Israeli Navy to a firewall QA engineer at Check Point, to a long career at the Herjavec Group, where he ended up as a vice president of cybersecurity solutions architecture. In his current passion, the Security Architecture podcast is an excellent source of interviews and information with thought leaders in the security space. There's a link in your handouts as well where you can check it out. So we're in great hands to hear about key features and decision points for choosing your next firewall, and I'm going to turn things over to Evgeniy.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Very happy to be here today and talk about a very interesting topic, firewalls. I actually started my career as a firewall engineer. I used to work at Check Point. It was more than 18 years ago. I used to test firewalls, and I had the privilege to test one of the first UTM, Unified Threat Management firewalls in Check Point. So I was testing how HTTP inspection is working, SMTP inspection is working, POP3, FTP, and many other protocols. So I like the term, I like the domain. I spend a lot of time installing, upgrading, and design and doing architecture in firewalls. And it's a very interesting question. What's happening with this firewall industry? Do we still need them? Do we still have a use for firewalls? We'll go and talk about this. I'll explain my point of view. You may agree, you may disagree. More than happy to talk about this later on. If you find me on LinkedIn or anywhere else, you can also find me on Security Architecture Podcast, where we discuss different vendors and how they're designed. So let's dive in. A bit about myself. As I mentioned, I've been around for 20 years. I had the pleasure to co-found Security Architecture Podcast with Dimitri Reitman. I also started my own podcast called Cyber Inspiration, where I interview security founders and what was their motivation to start the company: less security, more business and drive. I also had a conference called Ski and Snowboard Conference with a couple of friends, Tony and Jazz, earlier this year in March. I had the opportunity to consult to many companies in Europe, Canada, and US as part of Herjavec Group, where I worked for 16 years. And right now I'm independent consulting. I'm also on a board of that. I have 3 little kids and 1 grown up as well. We can talk about a different time as well. But let's begin. We're here for the firewalls. What do we see right now and what's trending? We all work from anywhere right now. We all want results fast. We have ChatGPT. We want this thing to know right now. We need instant gratifications and many different things. And of course, I just mentioned we have artificial intelligence, and I think my face is somehow disturbing what we see. So I'm going to move myself to the left for a second. And with artificial intelligence, we can definitely achieve more results and faster. In some cases, it's not a fix for everything, but there is definitely a lot of use cases for artificial intelligence. Is it complex? Is definitely complex. Everything we do right now has a lot of complexity. We're talking about architecture, we're talking about design, we're talking about many different terms and acronyms we have in the industry as well. How do we navigate everything we see and what to do about it? We'll talk about this, but we're going to focus on mainly on firewalls. And this brings a question: do we need firewalls? To do this, let's explain the type of firewalls we have. Later on, I will dive into some of the history of the firewalls, and then we'll speak about what do we need now, why do we need them, and also how to choose firewalls in case you want to buy one. What's a firewall? Firewall been around for more than 20 years. We probably know the term stateful firewall. We're not going to explain everything, how they work and what's the ideas there. But in general, we know that firewalls is creating a rule base for us that allow packets in and packets out. With next generation firewall that we'll dive in a bit later more, we're not just doing packets, we're also doing applications. And there's type of firewalls, there's several type of firewalls we have. We have an office firewall, we have a branch firewall, we have a data center firewall as well. Each of them is a bit different, and it's important for this conversation. What else we have? We also have segmentation firewalls. You probably heard about zero trust, that we're not going to go deep there, but it's important. Segmentation firewalls are segmenting different type of networks in our environment. They can do network segmentation, they can do micro segmentations as well, but it's also a firewall. Back in the days, we used to have flat networks where everybody can talk to everyone, and it's kind of was a problem. That's why we are moving more to zero trust architecture and concept with the way we design and organize our networks. I just mentioned microsegmentation. This is less of the physical firewall and more about an agent that usually deployed on the environment and one of the segments that control more who can talk to whom. So basically a host firewall. There's quite a big difference between host firewall on your laptop and host firewall on a server in the environment, because the type of applications and connections are a bit different as well. Another type of firewalls are B2B firewalls that I feel being neglected a lot. We hear a lot of people saying, is VPN is dead, but they're not providing a more definition to the VPN. VPN is technology. We have a remote VPN. We have tunnel VPN. In this particular case, many companies connect to other companies to their business to business over IPsec tunnels or over MPLS to exchange information. I know companies that has more than 200 firewalls in the same matter because they have many different partners, vendors they are working with, and they want to make sure the communication with them is fast, secure, and also protected. The last one that I want to discuss is IaaS firewalls. It's basically firewalls that are deployed in cloud IaaS, such as AWS, GCP, and Azure. You may say, but they have their own native firewalls in AWS, Azure, GCP. You're absolutely right. Having said this, many companies choose to use third-party vendors such as Palo Alto, Checkpoint, Cisco, and many others inside their cloud environment for, in some cases, more robust protection. In many cases, for management, centralized management, that's very important, log aggregation, and kind of better reach understanding on the governance of the firewalls. Just a quick summary where we are and what we spoke about it. So we spoke about internet access firewalls, data center firewalls, segmentation, micro-segmentation, cloud, and B2B firewalls. I want to go to quick history on different type of firewalls, and some of them you saw, some of them not, and explain how we got here. I mentioned the stateful inspection firewall that basically was the beginning. Yes, there was firewalls before. Yes, there's also proxy firewalls, application firewalls. I don't want to go very, very deep there, but I think it's important. This is where we started with the idea that we know what's coming in and what's coming out. But is just the firewall itself important, or there is something else? There is more stuff there. It's just a fun anecdote that I remember to find that this is from 97, so quite a long time ago. We're talking about speeds of, as you can see here, 10 megabytes per second. And we're also talking about cost average for $2,000. Right now, we're probably talking about $100,000 to $150,000 at 1 gig at 10 gig speeds. But it's just funny what people were thinking about it so many years ago. What happened with the firewalls? Not just the firewalls, we started to aggregate different security features on top of the firewalls. One of them is IPS, IDS in some cases, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention system. We not just allow the people get in, get out, we also want to understand what kind of attacks are happening in our environment and ideally protecting from these attacks. And the difference between IDS and IPS is in a way this IDS may bark on a problem and tell there's an issue. And with IPS, we have a true prevention when we understand the problem and can also act on this problem to eliminate the issue. As I mentioned before about IPsec, we also have an IPsec portion on the firewall. 20 years ago, and still in some cases, there was segregation between firewalling and IPS concentrators. We still see IPS concentrators in some cases for remote access, but in majority of the cases, the office-to-office communication is right now happening on the same firewall where we're doing filtering, from the main reason because we not just need to create a channel to someone else, we also need to understand what kind of traffic we want to allow and what kind of network can talk to each other. So IPsec tunnels, GRE tunnels in some cases, are fundamental in my mind to firewalling and to where we are right now. URL filter came along as well later on. In the beginning of 2000s, it mainly came as one of the requirements to protect the Child Internet Protection Act and to mainly control what kids, students can do in school and universities and where can they browse. It definitely expanded, and there is many different iterations and definitions of URL filtering right now. There is dynamic, it's in the cloud. So we have not just blocking sites you don't want to go, we can block it by time, we're blocking malicious websites, but it's definitely fundamental part of UTM, Next Generation Firewall, SASEs, and many other things as well. And of course, Next Generation Firewalls, around 2006, 2008, Palo Alto came with the idea, and they're still here, acting strong. Many other companies adopted the idea of Next Generation Firewalls. that change the way we do and we communicate. And there's a couple of important parts for it. One is definitely the parallel protection and parallel inspection, not protection, parallel inspection on the systems and on the traffic, that we don't want to create latency on inspection one after another, the way the UTM used to do, and we wanted to inspect it in the parallel mode to make sure we don't have degradation and don't have extra latency. But what else imported in Next Generation Firewalls, and it is fundamental to where we are right now and some of the other controls? First of all is the application. This is the main different part, that we saw that the bad guys are starting to use, and this we're talking about like 20 years ago, beginning. The bad guys starting to use other ports and protocols to access outside. So companies became smart. They close all the ports, or majority of the ports, and only allow HTTP. We're only talking HTTP, so now not even HTTPS. So the good guys, and later on the bad guys, realize they can use HTTP to get access. Skype, I think, was one of the fundamental one that were able to find an open port and get out of the environment in one way or another. And this become fundamental to next generation firewalls, because they not just understand ports and protocols, they understand applications on top of these ports. So when I'm running an application over HTTP, HTTPS later on, I understand this is the application. And frankly, right now, majority of the internet applications are running over HTTPS now, not even HTTP. So this is an important part. Another important part is its identity. I'm not just creating rules based on source destination networks. I'm creating rules that are based on who you are and what type of group you are as well. And this becomes fundamental to next generation firewall, because I now can create rules that can follow you. Doesn't matter on which floor you are, what you're doing, and where you're going. And even in the era right now where we are working from anywhere, this is how we know who you are and how to create a rule base for you. It starts with identity, then they can add the type of device, but less from where you're coming and the network you're coming from. SSL inspection. As I mentioned, majority of the traffic right now is HTTPS a bit. I didn't want to include statistics, but funny enough, right now, I think 98% of the traffic is HTTPS. 5-6 years ago, when I started to present on the topic of firewalls and inspection, the numbers were around 60. So right now, majority of the internet has the HTTPS protocol versus just HTTP, to the point that certain browsers want to remove the lock because they assume that everything already HTTPS and they can use the lock for something else when you browse. So what's happening right now, where we are, and what's going on? There's definitely two main components. Component number one is how we create rules. I kind of already mentioned this. We used to have rule based on subnets, and then in many cases the destination will be any and the protocol will be any. I had a lot of customers when we will go and do firewall health checks, we will run the reports, we use external tools, and we find many rules like this. The reason could be we didn't know what to put. It was a temporary rules. Somebody else did it before me. I left it like this. If I'm going to disable this rule, people will be not happy. This is the time when we started to help people transition to layer 7 rule base, a part of next generation firewalls. And right now, majority of the rule base we want to see right now is not just specific destination, not just specific application, but also authenticated user. We tell you we want to know from where you're coming, if it's a user, potential application, if it's a microsegmentation in the environment. This is related to rule base, but let's talk about firewalls. I already showed the slide before, but I'm going to talk right now how stuff change in what we do right now in the environment and how it's going to change or affect the way you buy or the way you maybe change your environment in the future. You may see the internet access is in the red. Why? Because right now, when somebody telling firewall is that, This is what they're thinking about. Like, why do I need a firewall? I have this SASE, SSE, cloud magic in the internet. I don't need anything like this. I'm going to explain what does it mean and why do we still need the firewalls right now? Because not everything is internet. There's other environments there, as I mentioned before. So when we are talking about internet access, this is a magic idea of secure service edge or secure access service edge, secure service edge. Secure access service edge, I spoke about this in the past and in this channel as well. But the idea is a framework by Gartner to start in 2019 that include 3 security controls: secure web gateway, firewall as a service, CASB and ZTNA, and the network component. And secure service edge is later on a vendor categories that Gartner came in that basically only including the security component: secure web gateway, firewall as a service, CASB and ZTNA. And you may hear other people not including firewall as a service under the security web gateway. I personally think it's wrong because different companies have different ways to protect it. But in the end of the day, if I am a proxy on a firewall, I'm still delivering the same capabilities. And we're just talking about features and speed. So when I want to protect an environment, let's call it a corporate environment of users going to the internet, I want to use SASE capabilities. The SASE capabilities, SSE capabilities, will have a next generation firewall component or secure web gateway component. They can be delivered in a cloud or on-prem. The reason why I potentially may choose cloud or on-prem will be different. But in this case, we're going more from a traditional firewalls to SSE, especially now it's a category. Certain firewall vendors providing SSE capabilities as part of the firewalls. But it's not a traditional firewall as we know. So you might say, Evgeniy, yes, you're right, but you're kind of going around and selling we still need firewalls, but actually don't need firewalls. In this case, when we talk about user access to the internet, the majority of the vendor name we're going to use going to be SSE, and it may be delivered as part of the firewall, but the name will be SSE. And I may use it in the cloud. I'm probably going to use it in the cloud because SSE have to be in the cloud. There are some instances on-prem. I may use an agent to connect to this environment. I may use an SD-WAN equipment to connect to the environment. And the SD-WAN equipment may have a firewall component. So this is one option. As part of my connectivity to SASE vendor, I'm going to use SD-WAN hardware equipment with firewall component, or I'm going to use firewall equipment in my office that will provide several things. It may provide my segmentation inside my company. So here's the firewall, and then access to the internet. Whereas the majority of the security features that in the cloud are going to be in the cloud for the inspection. Why would I choose one and another? Why would I need firewall in these remote offices with SD-WAN? Because I may have network segmentation. I may be PCI compliant in some cases. I may want to do more things internally, or may I still have MPLS internally as well and not using the full capability of SSE. This is one part. Second part is definitely a data center. And I believe this is one of the main parts people forget when we're talking about firewalls. If I'm delivering an application to users that sits in a data center, I'll need a firewall before that. This firewall will control access to my DMZ or where the application is located. The firewall will have features that potentially similar to DDoS, and it will prevent people to connecting to my applications not authorized. It will allow access to my developers to work on these applications as well. So these firewalls in the data centers that could be facing the internet or internally segmented as well are very applicable. And the SSE SASE component is not actually solving this use case. You may say, but I have ZTNA remote access. Yes, you have, but this is going to be for internal users. This particular part is firewalls that are sitting on the edge of your data center or in edge of your cloud, where the end user of your application will connect to it. It could be a bank, it could be insurance company, it could be e-commerce company that will have such firewalls. And these firewalls will exist right now, and will take a long time before they disappeared. They may disappear in the future if we're going to go fully to a cloud and decide not to use a firewall in a cloud and just use native firewall protections from the cloud part. But we're still quite a long time away from there. I just mentioned firewalls in the cloud, so this still exists as well. The reason company want to use a third-party vendor such as Palo Alto, for example, in the cloud, from several reasons. If you're talking about AWS, security groups may not provide all the capabilities that Palo Alto will provide. They will have less login opportunities as well. The management of security rules groups versus Palo Alto is way different. And many enterprise companies want to have a centralized management that it's very important to manage all the firewalls. And not just management, I also want audit capabilities and logging capabilities from these firewalls. And if I'm going to work with multiple clouds, where we definitely see it with enterprises, it's even more fundamental to understand what's happening globally with everything. I mentioned microsegmentation. Microsegmentation is also a use case for the firewalls, and it still exists right now. And I hope majority of the companies move from flat networks and have some kind of segmentation. Again, this component is actually software firewalls, not physical firewalls. Some vendors can do it as part of a virtual environment, like VMware, for example, can achieve this using segmentation internally with the environment, and I believe Cisco as well. And the last one here is IPsec tunnels and MPLS. Nobody removed the B2B firewalls. They still exist. They still exist for a long time. There's a movement to more connection over API with some vendors that will, in the future, remove the need and how many B2B firewalls exist. But right now, they still exist and going to remain for a long time. So let's talk about buying a new firewall. What do I do if I want to buy a new firewall? What's important for me and what's less important for me? Here's not such a quick list, quite a big list of different features. Some of them are bold, like management and security feature, because I think fundamentally right now, when you're buying a new next generation firewall that will serve as a data center firewall, as a B2B firewall, as a firewall in the cloud, or potentially in a branch with SD-WAN capabilities, you want to manage this easily. You want to manage this in a way that you understand what you have, you're able to audit, and you're able to find the problems very, very quickly. Going from the bold to the legger one, you want to understand what kind of firewalls you're buying. Are you protecting users or applications? As mentioned before, if you're protecting users, you may consider go down the SSE SASE path because it's providing more capabilities. It could be from a firewall company, or it could be from a different company, like Zscalers, for example, that have been around for a long time and focusing on this particular segment. If you're buying a firewall for applications to protect your application like a data center, this is where you are must look on clustering and high availability and geo failover, because you're probably going to have two data centers. So you want to be, the firewalls are highly available in one data center. So you may have two firewalls, active, passive. Have another set of firewalls in the other data centers, and you need to understand how it's going to fail over. Are you going to do some kind of a DNS failover or some other ways to fail over with extension? There's also new technologies right now that can help you to scale firewalls on-prem as well. This is the important part that you need to look in firewalls. They are even fundamental right now because everybody wants to be available all the time, even more than in the past. Networking capabilities, what I mean by this? We spoke about firewalls, high availability. What about networking? Can I put two cables? Can I actually aggregate into one channel, create 2 gig from two 1 gig cables, or 20 gig from two 110 cables, 10 gig cables? how this equipment going to work with the switches that you're going to connect to. Do I want to maybe cross switches? We're going to connect one firewall to two switches, and if one switch goes down, it's still going to work. Because there's different mechanisms to do it, but it's definitely important to understand what available in your company from networking gear and how firewalls will work together with them. Reporting is definitely important. We just mentioned about this. How would I know my firewall is doing a good job? How would I metric them? Version release. What if there is a fix that needs to be done right now? How quickly the company going to release an important fix? Or how often they're releasing versions? Version release will indicate to you the maturity of the company you're buying from, because you want to have a very steady version release. When you're buying a product in a cloud like SASE or an SSE, you don't even feel this, because the moment the company is releasing the feature, they automatically roll it in to your environment. You don't even know about it. But when you have a firewall on-prem, it's your responsibility to update and understand what's happening. I saw companies that by the time they're finishing to roll one version, they need to start rolling another version. So all these parts, it's important to you, and how easy it is to update the versions as well. Does it require reboot? Not require reboot. Segmentations, it's also important, because if you're buying a firewall for segmentation reason, it may have a bit different capabilities on inspection and SSL inspection, and bigger throughput. Sometimes internally you will not do SSL inspection, probably because you want to do it towards the internet, but you will need a high throughput because a lot of traffic going on internally. Responsibility and ownership. If it's a SASE SSE product, who's responsible on them? Probably the vendor. If you're buying the product, you're responsible internally. You need to understand the support, the RMA, and all these important parts in buying the firewall in case you need to have a failure and need to replace it. So the redundancy of the environment and the availability of the environment will also help you to understanding the responsibility and the ownership, because you're going to have a team that's going to in charge of installing the firewall. You're going to have a team that's in charge to operate the firewall, and also the team that will be in charge to replace some of the components in the firewall. Maybe the same teams, maybe different teams, but it's all important parts when you're buying the firewall, and also understand how the vendor going to help you in the journey when stuff going to go wrong or you're going to have a problem with some of the things. I mentioned IAM, so you do need to understand how firewalls or the vendor of the firewall will work with your current IAM provider. Can they work with Active Directory? Can they work with Azure? Can they work with Okta potentially to authenticate as well? Health checks and best practices are actually a very, very interesting topic. Very quickly in your journey, you realize there's a lot of features you don't use and you don't know why to use them. Hala, for example, released a very good practice called DPA report quite a long time ago, and it's available to everyone, when you can upload config and very quickly understand how healthy is your firewall, what else you're missing in the license you're entitled to, what do you need to install and configure to elevate your security posture. So this type of checks, this type of practices are important in what you do. The last one before we go to security features is virtualization. Can you upload the firewall on OEM? Is there a certain degradation of throughput? How do license gonna work? And definitely how you're gonna manage all this. So let's jump into security features. I divided security features between data center and between branch firewalls, because there is a bit different. On the office and branch firewall, this is basically in a way what the SASE and SSE market providing right now. Is the way we're protecting the users. And on the left side, we have, I'm gonna move myself to the right, we're gonna have the data centers and B2B. So here, we still want threat intelligence, we still want protection and IPS, we still want malware in case people moving files back and forth. In some cases, the data center firewalls are also the ones that are doing the ZTNA remote access for smaller companies. DDoS features could be interesting, even so it's not a DDoS presentation right now, and DDoS should be probably done in the cloud. There are still some features that can help you in a smaller engagement. Geo protections are very, very key and important. because if your company operates in North America, for example, you can actually not even allow connections from China, Europe, or any other countries you're not working with. It's in a way of a DDoS protection even before that, because if there is no way for you, if there is no reason for you to do business with these companies, they don't even allow connections there. There's also data center features that are related to IoT and OT to help you with this protection there. And definitely we mentioned VPN tunnels as well. I put here remote access host checker again from the perspective, because if I'm doing remote access and ZTNA, I want to double check who can connect to me even before they connect. I want to understand if this particular device is part of my company, so I can connect and understand if it's not connect. I can understand if it's a domain device, has it had an antivirus or certificate. So they are important for firewalls that are doing remote access. Even so, as I mentioned, this is probably going to fall in under SASE and SIC, where we have a very similar capabilities. The last two are sandboxing, and this is very similar to threat protection, because if there are some files that are happening, we want to make sure we can identify what are the files and understand what they do, and there is nothing malicious in these files. Last one is API support, and what I mean by this, if the vendor and the firewall have API, it means I can program them much faster. I can get information from them much faster. And this, in many cases, mean I can pre-build them much faster or connect them for different information in an easier manner. In the past, for example, we use SNMP to get help of the firewall. Right now, in some cases, I can use API connectivity to get information about firewall components and present them on different dashboards. Last slide here is about how to POC and how to buy a firewall in a different lines. I'm not going to talk about this for a very, very long time, but I'll quickly touch base on some of the criteria. So first of all, we want to have business alignment. What is the use case and what we're going to do about it? Then we're going to have it, our trusted advisor or the VAR is different people in the industry. We want to talk to them and understand which direction we want to take. Then we can enrich the information with market research and understand more about the pricing, reference, and compliance about a particular vendor. After that, I probably have a list of different vendors, and I start going towards the POC part. And in the POC part, it's fundamental in my mind. If you're not going to remember anything for what I spoke for the last 40 minutes, is this part. Please remember success criteria. Please don't start a POC if you didn't define success criteria for what you're trying to test. If no, you're going to have square every time, and you're going to lose exactly what you're trying to achieve. What are you testing? And your management will probably want to be happy with the results. With the success criteria, you can score vendors, you can understand what they do, you can stay focused, you don't have a scope creep, what they say in the industry, and you'll be able to achieve a better success in this environment. The other part I want to mention here, every time you do a POC, have a runner-up. Sometimes the vendor you're going to work with not going to be able to supply everything you need. So if you have a runner-up, you can easily go and switch to other vendor to make sure you get what you need. And I think in this case, it was the last slide. So I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to talk about other topics. And I'm definitely happy to connect later on if you want to go deeper here. I have Dimitri, my co-founder of Security Architecture, on this slide as well. It's just because these slides are delivered as part of Security Architecture. Thank you, everyone. And I'm happy to listen to questions.
Evgeniy, great overview. I love the squirrel reference. It's so important to stay focused on what matters. But I also really liked your segmentation of firewalls into the 5 types. You had the internet access firewalls, data center firewalls, segmentation, micro-segmentation firewalls there, cloud IaaS firewalls, and B2B firewalls. So we have a couple of questions coming in about some of that too. One person is wondering, is cloud IaaS firewall the same as like a web firewall? Are those the same thing?
So going to be, as we say in the industry, depends. In
Okay.
majority of the cases, when we are putting the firewall internally in IIS, it's probably going to be more like a segmentation firewall because we're going to segment between different parts of the AWS, Azure, or GCP. In some cases, when we want to provide access, so for example, in that AWS, we maybe call it like an outbound VPC. When we want to provide access to the internet, then it will be similar to internet access firewall.
Okay. All right, great. And another question here, they're wondering, do most organizations need all 5 types of firewalls that you mentioned? You know, are there some sort of core categories and then others are sort of specialty use cases?
Definitely not. And let's provide an example. Let's say you're a marketing agency, or maybe you're audio and video production agency, and majority of your information is basically going to the internet, and maybe majority of the services you're using are SaaS-based services, Office 365, Salesforce. You probably will use the internet accessible firewalls, so the internet firewalls. And maybe in certain cases, you need a segmentation firewall to segment different networks in your environment. So you will not need other stuff. Also, if you're a small company, you may don't want to have a firewall in AWS Azure, and you're going to use the native firewalls. The more robust companies and bigger companies, they want to have a very good way to manage the firewalls, what I mentioned before. This is where you're going to use the third-party firewalls. Other example, if you're a bank or you're an insurance company or you're an e-commerce company, or you have services in your data center where you provide access to external users, this is where you need a data center firewall. Or you have communications with other parties on business to business, and you want to put a firewall for MPLS, IPsec, or other type of connections to them.
Gotcha. Thanks for that context. So in your talk, you mentioned AI briefly. What do you see as the role of AI, if any, in the firewall space?
This is interesting and very problematic question in our current generation because everybody want to slap AI on everything.
Yeah.
So here's my view. And we actually just discussed it with some of our friends on a social media post a couple of weeks ago. AI is here to help. It's not here to take the job and do it instead of you. As an example, if I need to write a script to create a user, let's put it like this, and I do it 1, 2, twice, 3 times, then I can figure out, okay, it's not a script, maybe like basically I need to have a manual work. I can do a script to do the work instead of me. And next time I need to create a user, I'll run a script and it'll do it for me. So I used a technology to do my work more efficiently. In the same matter, I can use AI to help me to do my work. Now, what does it mean in the firewall space? Firewall have a lot of information. Firewall have a lot of logs. So I can use AI to sort the logs, to do my investigation using AI, to create a better reports. So for example, if I want to create a report on what Scott did last summer, I will have on the backend create an algorithm that's going to run and find Scott everywhere and find the information and maybe aggregate it somewhere. With AI, I probably will able to do it more efficiently, faster, and also not just to have raw logs, but also a summary about Scott. This is one example. Other example, and especially in the firewalls, I don't think we have it now yet, but I'm definitely going to have it very soon. In big companies, we need to do firewall health checks. I mentioned this in the presentation as well, like BPA from Palo Alto, for example, is helping us to create health checks and best practices. But in general, I need to validate my rule base to see how many rules I have. Are rules open or more strict? And this is used to be done manually. Later on, several companies join the effort where they're providing you help to sort this information. I know companies with more than 4,000 rules, and sometimes they chain firewalls. They're going to be one firewall after another. With AI, I probably will able to do this work faster, understand the traffic flows easier, and also understand how I can make my rule base more efficient and more secure as well. And ideally, I want to have a layer 7 rule base and more aligned to zero trust methodology as well.
Okay. Yeah. No, great example there about a company with 4,000 rules. You can really see how that could be helpful. So speaking of innovation, the firewall space is pretty mature. Where do you see like sort of the most innovation happening in the firewall market?
I think it's definitely on understanding the flow of traffic and aggregations of different solutions in there as well. So we have URL filtering, we have DNS security right now, we have threat intelligence. It used to be threat intelligence will be added manually. Now we have automation and actually AI as well for threat intelligence as well. Oh, there is more integration right now to the persona, to the I am, who you are, and what do we do. I mentioned briefly about this important part to not creating rules based on where you're coming, but also from who you are. And I can add behavior on top of this. So I can allow you to have rule base, but if you're doing something malicious or something dangerous or potentially behaviorally not what you used to do, I can probably raise and create problems or basically like a ticket. So this is one innovation that's happening. We definitely see more aggregations. So firewall used to be just a firewall. Now, and then it became more a VPN device. Now we see aggregation between firewalls and SD-WAN devices. And definitely important innovations happening, and we can do certain things in the cloud right now. Some of the logic is done in the cloud and not on the device itself. So this is important part in my mind. And one innovation that I like personally is the option of API. And I'm not talking about API security. I'm talking about how I can manipulate and talk to the firewall to get more information to the firewall and from the firewall.
Gotcha. Yeah, good stuff. We have another question here about microsegmentation. So, with the focus on zero trust, do you see microsegmentation agents replacing a lot of firewalls over time as people get further along on the zero trust journey, or is it really a different section of the IT estate?
In my mind, it's a combination. So I may have an endpoint agent firewall in my data centers. I'm still going to have my firewall to the internet or to the data center. And ideally, they will understand and talk to each other and going to be easier to create rules across all of them. So they're not going to replace, they may augment, or we may provide different functionality to each other, but they're definitely not replacing. We do see quite a big movement to migrate cloud infrastructure to a cloud where I potentially will do stuff a bit differently. But when I build them in a cloud and not just moving them, I'm going to create them in a zero trust architecture right away and not kind of try to move and shift what I have on-prem in an ugly way, flat networks into the cloud.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, Evgeniy, that's probably we're getting up on time here, but last thing I want to ask you is just, you've mentioned the Security Architecture podcast with you and Dimitri, who's also here on the screen. Could you tell us a little bit about the podcast and what you're focusing on in the current season?
Definitely. So me and Dimitri have this podcast for now several years. The idea was to start a podcast that will help buyers to buy the equipment they need and not the equipment somebody is trying to push down to them. So we have seasons, and every season is a bit different. And every season we create questions and invite vendors to answer the questions. And every vendor will have to answer the same amount of questions and the same type of questions. Season 1 was about secure web gateway. Season 2 was about remote access, ZTNA. Season 3 was about application security, SaaS, DAST, and many others. Season 4, we're finishing right now, about enterprise browser, brand new category, only been around less than 18 months. And we're finalizing season 4 and starting season 5 about cloud security. We're going to dive to CNAPP, CSPM, CIM, because it's a very important part. And as I mentioned just 5 minutes ago, many people moving their infrastructure to a cloud.
Yeah, great stuff. Yeah, I'm a fan of the podcast, and everybody, you can see the link down there to check it out. Well, Evgeniy, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Appreciate your time and all your knowledge here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, and before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that $250 Amazon card today is Luke Miller from Texas. So congratulations to Luke Miller. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank our sponsors, Palo Alto and Zscaler, for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for all of your great questions. That concludes this event. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend, and we will see you next time.